in this second half about fascism. I want to talk about it because you've asked me to. I want to talk about it because it's on the agenda historically around the world. And I also want to remind everyone of history. We are the year 2022. 100 years ago, 1922, is when fascism really begins in Europe. 1922 is the year of something called the March on Rome. It was October of 1922 when Mussolini led the March on Rome and took over in what was basically a coup d'etat, taking over the Italian government. And he then instituted a fascist regime. It lasted from 1922 until around 1944. At that point, it came to an end, and Mr. Mussolini was hung upside down in the street and killed by the people that he had led, which tells you something about fascism. Hopefully, you will remember. The next case of fascism happens 11 years later. It's January 1933, and in Germany, the government there turns itself over. Didn't require quite the coup d'etat, but it took not that different a form, turned the government over to the leader of a fascist political party, like Mussolini in Italy, only his name was Adolf Hitler, and he was head of the Nazi Party. And a few years later, in 1936, a democratically elected government in Spain was overthrown by an illegal military revolt of General Franco, who waged a civil war, displaced that government, and established Spanish fascism, which lasted several decades. And then he died. And Spain reverted back to a non-fascist arrangement. Those are the three major fascisms we know about. And what I'm about to tell you is what we know from what they actually did. Before each of them, capitalism, the dominant economic system in each of those three countries, was content with and satisfied with what we are familiar with as parliamentary democratic government. You know, elections every year, people elected to one or two house legislature, like our Congress, and going about the normal business of running a capitalist society. Everybody gets to vote, we pay a lot of attention, but the people with the money, the capitalists, the wealthy, the big CEOs, they run the show because they donate to the parties, they donate to the candidates, their lobbyists help write the laws. We're all familiar with that because we're used to that here too. The problem is, in each of those countries, the capitalism that was normally perfectly happy with conventional representative electoral democracy was falling apart. The capitalism was producing such suffering, such anger, such bitterness among the mass of people that there was a developing anti-capitalist movement. And this scared the capitalist class, the owners of the enterprises, the big CEOs. They could see the handwriting on the wall. In Italy, just before fascism, you had the greatest general strike in the history of the country in Torino, led by a then obscure communist named Antonio Gramsci, who becomes one of the great communist theoreticians of the 20th century. Terrified people. In 1917, a few years before, an anti-capitalist revolution in Russia succeeded, terrified capitalists everywhere in the world, here in the US too. So there was this sense it's falling apart, our system. And when that happens, there's a strong push, doesn't always succeed, but a strong push to push aside representative democracy, all of that, and have the iron heel, the iron fist. Change the government from that game to one where its job is to control the society, repress every critic of capitalism you can find, do it all in the name of the race or the nation or patriotism, to give it all a better sounding name than saying we're going to save capitalism by crushing everybody who disagrees with it, everybody who has turned against it. So it is done in the name of, well, the nation, nationalism. It's a good way of covering it over. Everything we're doing is not about preserving capitalism. That's the real agenda. It's about preserving the nature, or preserving white America, if you bring it over into us, or preserving the Italian soul, or preserving genuine Spain, whatever it was always the same. And here's what it involved. You crush the labor unions. You either kill them, that happened often, jail them, exile them, no more labor unions unless the fascist party owns and operates the unions. You go after the socialists, you go after the communists. Antonio Gramsci, the leader of the Communist Party in Italy, the leader of that great strike, was imprisoned by Mussolini and spent the last 20 years of his life in jail. That's why his most famous writings are called the prison notebooks, because it's Gramsci writing in Mussolini's jail. Hitler killed people, so that was easier. And in the Spanish Civil War, vast numbers of people were killed as well. All of the so-called Republicans, they were known as, in Spain, were destroyed by the fascists. So that's what it is. It's capitalism enforced. You still have employers and employees, like capitalism before. The leaders of the capitalist industries remained there unless they were deemed to be not part of the nation. The Germans had that worked out because they made Jews not part of the nation, and therefore they could take their property, distribute it among the rest, and therefore become even more popular because capitalists got richer by taking over what had been destroyed among the Jews, etc., etc. And in order to glorify all of this as saving the nation, well, what did Hitler do? He got rid of homosexuals, he got rid of gypsies, he got rid of anybody and everyone he could think of in this race national celebration. But don't be fooled. Underneath the veneer of the government coming in is the ultimate purpose: protect capitalism. That's why it's there. That's why this is done. It's the extreme of capitalism having produced its own negation, its own opposition, its own self-destruction that calls forth the fascist alternative to come in there and deal with things in that harshness that has nothing to do with the old convention. So don't be surprised if you hear the American version of all of this. Here's how it works. Mr. Trump and the people around him are saying, well, we have to exalt the nation. Mussolini promised to make Italy great again. Hitler promised to make Germany great again. Franco promised to make Spain great again. Hint, Mr. Trump promises to make it again. And he declares who's not really quite part of the nation. That's people who aren't white. You don't have to be too subtle to get the parallels here. But now let's look at the opposition to Mr. Trump, because there's a lesson there too. When the folks around Mr. Biden tell us that they are protecting democracy by focusing, for example, on the January 6th activities of the Trump people around the Capitol in Washington. Yeah, I know what they mean. They want the elections to go on. But if you look at it historically, what you're really getting is a demand for how things were before. It's a demand of people who don't want to see or face that capitalism is in deep trouble. And if something isn't done about that, the turn towards fascism will only accumulate more steam, more support, more momentum. Against Mussolini, there were Italians who wanted to protect parliamentary democracy in Italy. They lost. against Hitler, there were all kinds of liberal Germans who wanted to protect their parliamentary democracy. They lost. The same thing, the government in Spain wanted to continue to be a representative electorate, and they were destroyed. This is a problem. The problem is the debate about protecting democracy versus protecting the nation, the racial soul, the Aryan, whatever it be. These are disguises for two alternative ways of protecting capitalism. But because they can't say that, and because they can't really face it, they can't deal with it either. So the problem keeps getting worse. That's why Americans rightly have the sense that the underlying difficulties keep getting worse. Our job situation, our income situation, the fact that the shelves in our supermarkets can't be maintained. These are all signs of a system that isn't working, and Americans know it. Trump promised everything, delivered very little. The gap between rich and poor got much worse under Trump. It is getting worse under Biden. They're not dealing with the underlying problems, and those are at root what is shaking this system to the foundation. Glorifying the nation and using that to come down, will that happen in the United States? It certainly may. It certainly may. That is the historical pattern. We are not exempt from that. All those other societies thought they were. In Germany, for example, they had one of the most powerful labor movements, socialist movements, communist movements in the world. That's where Marx comes from, Germany. That's where the Socialist Party got bigger and stronger. In the years before Hitler took power, socialist and communist parties together got half the vote in every election in Germany. That's why they scared the capitalists. They scared them. And so they went and chose what for them was the only way they could be sure they would survive. The democratic system that they had supported wasn't anymore the guarantor as it had been. So they opted for the fascist solution. Why would you imagine that American capitalists, also confronted by a system that is not only breaking down, but is generating a greater degree of questioning and opposition to capitalism than we've seen in this country since when? Since the 1930s. And what was that period? Gee, that was the breakdown of capitalism that likewise generated a powerful anti-capitalist thrust in American society. So yeah, we are at a crossroads in our society. Fascism is one solution that the capitalists may opt for. And the real political question is whether an opposition to that solution is possible. Saying we want to protect democracy, go back to the way things were, I frankly don't think that's an available option. And that means maybe the time has come when the left has to be able to say, we really do want not to save capitalism, but to go to a new, different, and better system. Because saving capitalism has had this 100-year history from the March on Rome fascist solution to the present moment when we face something so very similar. Thank you for your attention. I hope this kind of analysis is of use to you. And as always, I look forward to speaking with you again next week.